The following is a conversation with Dave Erickson. Dave Erickson is a serial entrepreneur with over 30 years of diverse business and international experience. Presently, Dave is the CEO of Screaming Box, a leading digital development company. Tune in to hear more about his story. So, Dave, having the chance to work at a variety of industries or with a variety of industries, what's been your favorite one to work with thus far?
Well, I've liked all the industries that I've worked in. It's more about, what I do in the workflow versus what industry. I've entered several new industries, and I've enjoyed them, mostly from the learning experience. Example, I did solar, ran a solar company. We engineered a solar product. That was very interesting, a lot of learning there. I love doing software development. My basis is marketing, so I have a marketing company, and I've been doing that for 20 years as well. For me, I've never really been that focused on industry because once you kind of have a lot of experience in business and business different industries, you understand that the business mechanics are kind of the same in all the industries. And it's really about what are the business mechanics and how do you leverage them to succeed.
Got it. So you would say across a lot of the stuff that you've worked in, regardless of the industry, there's a lot of parallels. And even though you're working with different companies, you still see the same way to add value regarding just the kind of mechanics behind running businesses.
Yeah, in general, people are people, right? And it doesn't matter what industry they're in. The mechanics of the market, how people buy things, sell things, market things, how that's done, the communication and all that. Those mechanics are kind of the same in every industry, right? And if you
Hmm.
understand how they work, the industry is more about the details, right? Versus the actual mechanics, right? And
Hmm.
so when you go into a new industry, yes, you definitely have to focus on the details to learn all the different details and all the variations and possibilities of the products or services. But the actual mechanics of business are pretty much the same no matter what industry, right? And
Hmm.
if you have that understanding of business mechanics, that takes care of 50% of the problem, right?
Got
So
it.
moving from industry to industry, I found as I've gained more experience, it becomes easier and easier. Where, you know, yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, I was gonna add in really quickly. Speaking of those mechanics, are there anything more specific that you'd add, like specifically to what kind of mechanics that you see businesses in different industries have trouble with? Like if there's a common theme among these, through
Oh,
diverse industries.
communication.
Hmm.
Communication is the biggest barrier and biggest thing that people struggle in, right? And the reason for that is people have different personalities, right? And so they communicate differently. And depending on who you are, you may be listening to somebody and you don't hear what they're actually saying because of a personality difference, right?
Hmm.
Or it could be that the way they're communicating isn't necessarily the best way for you, right? Part of this also has to do with literally the technology of communication. Nowadays, there's so many different types of communication and channels that people communicate on, depending on when you learn something and how old you are and where you are. Uh, you know, your standard form of communication may not be the standard form for other people, right? I have that issue. I basically grew up in business on email, and my main primary communication tool is email. Although I have a lot of people who love Slack, and so I had to learn Slack, but it isn't something I naturally gravitate to. So sometimes I miss communication, or I communicate and I don't do it on Slack. I forget to put the message in Slack. I do it by email, and so I've had to kind of relearn a lot of that stuff. And so that's a challenge that people have. I know I'm not the only one. I talk to people every day who are like, "Oh my God, my business has 5 different, channels for communication. I don't know which one. I use these two. I miss messages." It really is a big challenge in business nowadays. How do you communicate and how do you make it all work? Um, Fortunately, there's a bunch of AI tools that are coming out that are making it easier so that even if your primary source of communication is, say, Slack, You can automate it so that messages go out by email, or on Facebook Messenger or LinkedIn Messenger or whatever platform people you can kind of over communicate a little bit with some AI, and that makes sure things happen. Um, but obviously, personal communication, right?
Mhm.
Meeting people in public versus meeting people online. You know, our company, Screenbox, we've been remote for the last 10 years. We started remote, right? We didn't want to have offices. I've had offices, I've had all that stuff. I didn't like all the overhead, and this business with software development, most of the
Mhm.
developers we like are senior level. They don't want to work in an office. They prefer working remotely. And so we've just developed it. And it took a change to figure out what's the best way to communicate with everybody, what's easiest, what makes sure, between clients, developers, ourselves. It just took some learning experience. And after a couple of years, we kind of got it down and understood it. And then it's been smoothly. And when the pandemic hit, it didn't affect us at all because we were already 100% remote. So that was actually something really beneficial for us. But for many companies and many business people, communication will always be the primary challenge for them.
I think that's a really good note there. I think underratedly, as you might attest to, a lot of technology companies have actually been remote for quite some time, even prior to COVID. So I know there are other aspects of COVID that I'm sure they had to deal with, but I think a lot of people started to realize that working from home wasn't just the new norm, that a lot of people were actually doing that before. So, really interesting note on that. Do you think that the future of work communication is more kind of towards emails, which seems to be part of the more conservative culture, or part of that instant messaging with apps like Microsoft Teams and Slack?
I think nature and business are both the same, and that
Hmm.
is nothing ever stays the same. So it is always moving, right?
Hmm.
And it may seem like it stays the same for 5 years or 10 years, but when you look at overall, it's always going to be shifting. And
Hmm.
there's always going to be new forms of business and communication mechanisms. So don't get too comfortable in any one. And, you just have to assume. I mean, remote work has a real benefit and it really has a place. But like I said, I've had offices and I've had people, and that has its benefit as well. And for different types of work, different types of businesses, remote may not be the solution, and remote may actually be damaging. I can tell you that in a plumbing business, remote doesn't mean anything because the work is not done remotely. You can maybe have 5% of the work done remotely,
Hmm.
but most of it's done physically. But even human communications, I see it. It's always going to be a pendulum swinging back and forth, right?
Hmm.
Um, you're going to have a lot of people who are doing a lot of remote communication, but then people are going to want to see and talk to people. I myself personally like that. I like having personal communication, meeting people, and I do a lot of networking remotely though, right?
Hmm.
So I think that it's a mix of things, and you have to figure out for your business and what you're doing what achieves the best result. And it may move around, right? I mean,
Hmm.
one year it may be, hey, trade shows are the rage and everything's doing great. And then the next year you go to a bunch of trade shows and it's not working very well and you're not getting a lot of feedback and the remote stuff is doing better, right? So it's always going to be kind of moving. And as a business person and an entrepreneur, you just have to be really aware of what's working, what isn't working. If you're in this mode that whatever is working is just going to keep on working, Mother Nature is going to come around and surprise you, and all of a sudden it ain't going to work, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, a good example is I have a lot of friends who technically they're my competitors, but they're businesses who do web development and agency work just like us. But, we use their developers, they use our developers, we use their resources. Sometimes I get clients, they don't fit us. I give them over to a friend of mine who has a different type of agency and it fits them better. And so I've worked with a lot of them, and a bunch of them, they do a lot of remote marketing and inbound marketing and doing a lot of landing pages and buying ads and all that. And they keep telling me this year a lot of it changed, right? And so the stuff that worked well for 3 or 4 years in a row all of a sudden aren't working. So they're having to figure out what works, right?
Hmm.
Whereas for me, I do a lot of personal communication and relationship, and it doesn't necessarily provide the greatest growth leverage. Um, it's steady business. So for me, I'm not really struggling with the fact that when I used to get, 10 inbound leads a week and now I only get one inbound lead a week, it doesn't affect me that much because my style of business is different, but it does affect them. And I tell them that, yeah, it does change. And maybe in 4 years from now, everybody will get back onto, oh, I want to find a web development. I'm going to go Google that. But right now, they're finding it by a personal relationship, right? So
Got
it all changes all the time.
I think that's fair. Do you think for a business where, say, remote work is a capability, where you have something like a SaaS business model, or just, everything, all your work is fully online, do you think that there's, managers often see a productivity risk or like a hindrance to productivity in working remote as opposed to being in the office?
Uh, if they do, they're not really focused on the right thing, right?
Hmm.
It's really about what fits the business best, right? There are types of work and positions that right now are more effective and more efficient remote, right?
Hmm.
Um, and part of it has to also be the business. Like we made a conscious decision when we started Screenbox, we were not going to be physical, right? We knew that that had advantages, but it also has disadvantages. Every business choice is the same. You have the advantages and the disadvantages. We decided that for us, we were going to shape our business so that the disadvantages of remote don't affect us as much. And that was
Hmm.
a conscious choice. Although we also knew that by doing that, we weren't going to be able to access certain types of business, right? And again, that was a choice. We said we would rather have the low overhead and have that growth direction, right?
Hmm.
So, creative work, a lot of that, yes, you can do it remote, but the best creative work is when you're in a room with a bunch of creatives and you're brainstorming and, you're going through stuff and you do that. Okay, that's not our strength. There's plenty of agencies out there who have an office and a great creative team, and that's what they do, right?
Hmm.
But for the type of work that we do, remote is really good if we want to get those senior level developers, right? Because they've all had the 9 to 5 job and they've all worked in an office, and now they would rather just not. They have a kid and they want to have the flexibility to, take them to the playground and then do work at night, right? Or however they wish to do it. So it really depends on what you're targeting, right?
Got it. So the highest talent now you think has significant bargaining power since, there's a lot of competition for the senior software development talent. They can kind of demand those kind of perks as opposed to the other way around.
Um, yes and no, right?
Hmm.
So there's still a lot of clients who are like, okay, I want a developer 9 to 5 full time, right? Um, and that's a certain style of developer. And whether they're remote or whether they come into an office, that in itself is its own kind of category.
Hmm.
Then there are people who want flexible developers. Hey, I need a developer to come in and fix this whenever I need it on call. That's a different style of developer, and they have completely different needs, right? Uh, some developer tech stacks and other things are in great need. And 2 years ago, nobody wanted them. Or 2 years ago, everybody was on to something else. You couldn't find a React developer if your life depended on it. And now there's plenty of React developers and they're all looking for projects, right? It's
Hmm.
always moving around, right? So the leveraging is really about who's available, what level you're looking for, what flexibility you have. For us as a business, we kind of target developers who are looking for a certain flexibility. And
Hmm.
we're also looking for clients who want a lot of flexibility, right? On the other hand, we do team extension. And I have some enterprise clients, and they're like, we love the way you source developers. We do a lot of personality testing and technical testing and other things. And they love the developers that we've given them. And those developers are, full-time developers on a steady gig for a year to 3 years, right? And that's a very different type of developer than what I would call our project developers, who like a lot more flexibility and always want a challenge. And so it really depends on the type of developer. And some are easier to find than others at different times, right?
Got it. So it just has to be a good fit between what the developer is looking for and really what the company has to offer.
Yeah. I mean, if your approach of finding a developer, and not just a developer, anyone, QA, uh, an artist, creative, marketing guy, accounting person. If your focus is finding a person who wants to do what you would like them to do and likes the way that you're going to offer them something, whether it's flexibility, whether it's security, whether it's stability, whether it's creativity, they all kind of have, this is what is really important to me. And in finding people, you need to really understand from them what's important for them. And if you really want them, you have to have the flexibility to be able to provide that, right?
Hmm.
That goes away as you become a bigger and bigger company, right? And this is what enterprise companies struggle with a lot, is that the company culture becomes so structured and rigid because they're so big that they don't have a lot of flexibility. They offer an employment package. This is what we offer. If you like it, don't take it. If you don't like it, goodbye, right? Whereas if you're a smaller business, you have the flexibility to say, well, is this really a person I want in my organization? If he is a person, if his personality fits the way you like to do business, if the way he communicates is a way that, fits you and your other, employees or people or staff or whatever, then okay, what do I need to give him to make sure he's working with us and is happy, right?
Hmm.
You can hire a person and just throw a lot of money at them and get them, but if you don't give them the thing that makes them happy, they're going to move on pretty quick, right?
Hmm.
And they won't be happy even though they're getting the money they want. They're not going to produce the quality that you want or be enthusiastic about the work.
Hmm.
So if you really focus on the other person, getting to know them, figuring out what they really want, and providing those things for them, even though they're usually not related to money, that's really kind of a key to getting good people. And even in a tight market, they all talk to each other. So in software development, if the developer is saying, "Hey, Screenbox, they're very flexible. They're really helping us. They do a lot for me besides the money. They have great clients. They're easy to communicate with." That spreads, and so it's easier to get developers who know
Hmm.
that, right?
Got it. Fair. So it's really kind of similar to what you said earlier about just having a good fit, but knowing that that changes over time and especially becomes harder as a company grows larger because it's harder to keep that really intimate culture. So it's definitely an interesting dynamic to watch over time. The other thing, going back to something you were saying earlier regarding communication being a big issue, not to ask this in like a trick question way, but do you think that there's often over communication or under communication between, or not between or within a company?
Oh, absolutely. It's a daily struggle, right?
Hmm.
And it's just the way people are. Oh, if you care about the other people, right?
Hmm.
So if you don't care about the other people, it's not a struggle at all. You just communicate the way you want to
Hmm.
communicate. But then you deal with all the other problems of people not being there very long and not being happy and all that, right? But if
Yeah.
you care about everyone being happy and comfortable, right? Your clients, your workers, your
Hmm.
staff, whatever, then communication is a daily, I wouldn't call it struggle. It is a daily occurrence, right?
Hmm.
And people are people. So, oh, I gave this guy too much over communication. He's kind of pissed at me because I'm always bothering him and I'm sending him all this communication. All right, I'm going to go the other extreme. I'm going to send him less, see if that makes him happy, right? So then you swing to the other thing. You're not, and then you find out later he's not happy because you're not communicating enough with him. So it's really hard to find that balance. It takes a
Hmm.
little bit of time. After a while, you'll eventually find it if you're communicating. So if the other person is feeding back to you, hey, I like you sent me just way too much. Don't send me this stuff anymore. Just
Hmm.
send me this. And if you can get that down, okay, great. Am I sending you enough? Yes. Okay, great. Then you found that balance with that person, right?
Got
And
it.
again, large companies, they have a hard time with this because they just have one form of communication for everybody, right? But again, everyone's different. For us, it's a little bit easier. We have a what I would call a smaller company.
Hmm.
We have lots of developers, but internal staff is very small. We prefer to keep it that way, and we've all known each other for years, so the communication is very balanced and easy. But it doesn't always mean it's that way, right?
Got it. So,
And clients are the same. Some
mhm.
clients, they love to communicate, and other clients, they don't. I have a client where I have to literally bother him for a month until I finally get a phone call with him, right? Uh, and other clients are like calling me every day. What's this? What's this? What's this? So it really is very different. That's why communication is always a challenge, right? Because
Mhm.
it's different for every single person, right?
Got it. So the thing is, I think maybe does this sound like an accurate way to summarize that? It's not about there's often issues over communicating or under communicating. It's really both and finding that balance depending on the person that you're trying to speak with or communicate with.
Yes.
Okay.
Like in life, in business, it's all about balance, right?
Got it. Fair.
And nothing stays the same.
Hmm.
So when you do find balance, it's temporary, and it will change, right? You
Hmm.
just have to be very aware of what's going on, and if there's anything in business that is quote exhausting, it's the fact that you have to be very aware all the time, right? Particularly communication, because business is communication, right?
Yep.
Um,
Totally.
yeah, and yes, with SaaS, you can eliminate a bunch of communication because it's not personal. It's mechanical. You're, checking boxes and putting in numbers on a screen and transactions are happening. But the minute there's a problem, customer service steps in, and customer service is just communication, right?
Got it.
It's receiving information and then giving information and trying to fix something, right?
Hmm.
So you can't escape the need for communication in a business.
Yeah, I think it's also one of the things that you mentioned earlier regarding balance. I think, not to sound oxymoronic or counterintuitive, but a lot of times finding that balance means accepting that there is no balance and being at peace with that in some weird way that makes you calm and realizing, this is all going to be screwed up. I can just do my best and try to stay on top of it. So definitely can resonate with that.
Well, again, that comes back to people, and that's why when you choose to work with somebody, and you try to figure out, are they someone who it's easy to communicate with, or their style or their personality is one that fits well with you and the team, right? And again, that's one of the reasons we use personality testing and assessment, is to figure out, because I mean, if our team is very detailed oriented and we bring in a person who's very creative, but very, disorganized and not very structured, there's going to be lots of conflict, right?
Culture clash.
Right. And although sometimes you need that creativity, it takes effort to find a creative person whose personality is such that he's more organized than average, right? So he's both creative and organized, and that's someone you want to work with, right? Not
Hmm.
just, oh, he's super creative. Okay, well that's nice, but it doesn't matter if 6 months from now you're fighting with him all the time, because personality wise, he's always expecting you to give him work and information in a certain style, and you know that's not your natural style, and you can try to adjust it, but then you're going against what's natural for you, right? So it really makes a difference understanding the person, how they like to work, how they like to communicate, how do they like to receive work, how do they like to give work. Those are all really important things that I think a lot of people overlook, because they're looking at, what's his tech stack and what's his skill level and did he do this and did he do that and does he have experience. Those are all important things, but usually the most important things are things like, well, how does he talk to you, and how does he like to receive information, and how does he like to deliver the stuff, and does he like to work late at night, or does he like to work in the morning, or where's all that type of stuff can mean something, right?
Yep, totally. I mean, hiring is definitely tough and something we all need to kind of figure out. But I definitely think that's some great commentary on there. Uh, Personally, in your life, I know you've been a serial entrepreneur for quite some time now. So, was there ever a point in your life where you kind of made that entrepreneurial jump, or you always knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur as opposed to just an operator within a company?
Um, well, I mean, both my grandfathers were entrepreneurs and owned businesses. My dad has always been an entrepreneur, right? So it kind of runs in the family. And for me, it wasn't so much I'm going to grow up and own my own business. It was kind of this assumption that yes, I would own my own business. But when I started out working in a company and grew the company, and the company got pretty large, and at that point I then went and started a business. But
Hmm.
I think it's always good to gain experience. Yes, and I've met people where right out of college the first thing they did was start a business, right? And great. On the other hand, I didn't. I was happy to be in a larger company and a company that grew, and that gave me a certain level of experience. So when I did start my first business, I kind of had something to work with, and it was, it helped, right?
Hmm.
Um, I've had like 12 businesses in my life. Some have lasted 3 months, and some have lasted, I don't know, 18 years, right? So it really depends. The businesses I most feelings for are the ones that failed, right? Not because they failed, but it is only in their failure that I actually learned something valuable, right?
Hmm.
And I was able to take those lessons and say, okay, for the next business, let's not do that. I learned from it, and that allows you to grow, right? So if I had three businesses in a row that all succeeded, it might be that I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. Whereas I get bored of that pretty quick. So
Hmm.
for me, I like moving different industries and different types of businesses. And the only way you can do that is by having failure, so you learn what it works. And now a lot of those business mechanics I really know because I've experimented and I've seen the ones that don't work and what does work. And that's important as well, right?
For sure. I think a lot of times people or a lot of founders, and this is my kind of first venture with this podcast, so I'm hoping it's successful the first go around, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in the long run. But I think that a lot of founders, and definitely easier said than done, if their first few ventures don't work out, it can be a really emotional experience for sure. Because you sacrifice a lot of time. You probably weren't there for a bunch of events that you wanted to be at, and time is the one commodity we really can't get back. So it can really be an emotional experience. But if you can try to look at it as objectively as possible, there's always, maybe not always, there might be a few situations where just like, people weren't lucky. But I think that there's almost always a big lesson to be learned in failure. And if you can learn from that and keep going and kind of iterate and go upon your next business or the one, or, heaven forbid or God forbid if you uh, fail at that one, if you can kind of keep going, keep iterating and take all your failures and get one step closer to success every time, then sooner or later something is going to hit because you're going to learn a lot and you're going to get somewhere along
Mhm.
the way. So I think it's definitely a challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs to kind of undergo failure and learn from it. I think I can't think of any names off the top of my head, but I remember the one GoPro guy. I think he was as a guest shark on Shark Tank. I think he failed his first three or four businesses before he hit it large with GoPro, but most people probably only know him from GoPro, as in like, oh, this big, huge, awesome camera company. So, a lot of people fail, but their failures aren't highlighted. They're only successes. So definitely an interesting journey and an interesting note on that. Something that you said earlier that I thought was really interesting and really resonate with when you said that entrepreneurship runs in the family. I thought that was a beautiful line. And the other thing you mentioned, starting 12 businesses. Did you ever think about, hanging up the boots for a while, taking a break, or you're always kind of have that entrepreneurial itch to keep going?
Uh, you know, I don't have any desire to work in a large company, right?
Hmm.
I don't have a problem working with a large company, but if I did, it would be literally I'm kind of a separate piece, right?
Hmm.
I've done the company thing, and it's great, but now you've owned a bunch of businesses, you have that experience, going and having some managerial job as a small department or something. I mean, why? That's very redundant, right?
Hmm.
I've run a company. I've run several companies, right? Uh, and also, for me, the important things in life are learning and creativity, right? And when you have a business, you're always learning, you're always having to be creative for problem solving. And, the last couple of years I worked in a company, I remember literally falling asleep at my desk, right? And that's just not who I am, right? And my job is that of relationship. I love building and having relationships with people, and for me, that's what I like doing, right? So um, I will always have that, and as a result of having that, I always have opportunities, right?
Hmm.
My issue is not having opportunities. My issue is which opportunities do I have time for? Which opportunities do I want to invest in? Which opportunities do I want to make succeed, et cetera, right? So for me, I have a business. It generates money. It pays bills. And then I have two or three other businesses that are business in the sense that I'm talking to people. We have ideas. We'd like to make a business this way. What do we need to do to get there? And moving those quote opportunities along till they become a business,
Hmm.
right? And I've had times in my life where I've had three or four businesses running at the same time. I've had times in my life where I was like, okay, I just got to focus on one and have for a couple of years just one. And again, things change all the time, right? So sometimes the needs of the business change, and so it gets easier, it gets less, it gets harder, it gets easier. It's always moving, right?
Hmm.
So I kind of take things like that, and I'm kind of the age where I'm looking more for what feels good, what provides me interesting opportunity, right?
Hmm.
So I'm doing a lot with AI. We have a great AI team, and I love exploring where AI can go. I am a diehard science fiction fan from a very young age, so I've read all the AI, science fiction horror stories and all that. So I definitely know the danger of what AI could become, maybe.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I'm also using it, and I'm changing my business. So one of my businesses, my marketing company, we're using a lot of AI, and what I'm able to do now is focus on startups, which I couldn't really focus on before because we cost too much.
Hmm.
But AI has now allowed us to provide really good services at a really low cost, and it helps startups. So I'm like, great, I can give them a price they can actually afford and actually help them move their business forward. That's a great way. Okay, I'm not going to make millions of dollars from it, but I'm helping them. I learn something. I make a little bit of money from it. Okay, I'm willing to do that. I don't have to spend a lot of my time to do it. Great. That's a good way to do it, right?
Got it. I'm happy that you brought up AI. We'll definitely get into that a little bit later. But the other aspect kind of wants to touch upon. I think a lot of times entrepreneurs, thankfully there are some that are kind of, I don't want to say born, or it seems to be in their blood, as you kind of alluded to earlier. But generally, do you think that people who are more entrepreneurial or a little more creative have just less tolerance for kind of boring corporate BS?
I mean, that's a generalization. I
Hmm.
would say that, yeah, entrepreneurs tend to be people who get bored doing kind of either repetitive work or having a repetitive situation, right? And entrepreneurs are obviously risk takers, right? Even though I'm very conservative and risk adverse, the
Hmm.
fact of the matter is I'm an entrepreneur, so I take risks, right? Some entrepreneurs are very risk taking. They love taking big risks. They love the excitement of taking big risks. They've had big failures, but they've also had big successes. Other entrepreneurs are very risk adverse, but they like taking risks if they study and analyze everything and it's a calculated risk. And then they're very comfortable taking that risk.
Hmm.
I kind of a little bit more in the middle, maybe a little bit on the, calculating side of risk. Um, but, I do take risks and I'm happy to do that. Right.
Hmm.
And sometimes I try to analyze it so I feel more comfortable, and other times it's just complete gut instinct, right?
Hmm.
But you have to kind of find that balance within you, right? Like I
Got
said,
it.
some people are really happy just throwing it all out to the wind and seeing what happens, right?
Yep. So I think maybe less tolerance for kind of the mundane and more risk tolerance, I think, would be a good way to attribute it if we're looking at like
Yeah,
some video game characteristics over there. So maybe we'll have to draw
right.
up that avatar one day. But really cool stuff
I,
about that.
I mean,
You
I've known some entrepreneurs who spent 20 years in a Fortune 500 company, and for them in their life, that stability and that security was so important. And they used that to have kids and raise a family. And then they got older in life and were like, my kids are in school, I'm very secure, everything's taken care of. I've always wanted to start a business. Screw it, I'm just going to do it, right? And they take a
Mhm.
big jump that's completely different than what they did in the corporate world. They throw everything to the wind, they take a big risk, and maybe they succeed, maybe they fail, but if they fail, they're comfortable with it in the sense that they already took care of what they wanted to earlier, and they
Mhm.
were able to afford the risk, right?
Mhm.
Even though for the past 20 years they've had no risk, then they jumped in the water and all of a sudden had risk, and sometimes they do well and sometimes they don't, right?
Mhm. So to each their own risk, I guess is how I would would frame it in my head.
Yeah, it depends on your life situation and where you are. Like I said, I've seen entrepreneurs who literally got out of college and said, I'm starting a business. They
Mhm.
had nothing. They definitely weren't doing it because they had security. And again, they've failed, they've succeeded, they failed, then succeeded. I mean, all that. It depends. And again, for me, I actually worked almost a decade in the corporate world, right? I learned a lot. And, one of the things that makes a business valid is you're doing something and you realize there's either a better way or the tools that currently exist don't address this issue.
Mhm.
So I'm going to make a business that fixes this or does this. Those are usually the businesses that succeed because you're solving a problem, you're filling a need that other people are encountering the same because you have that experience, right?
Mhm.
Well, that's kind of the key. You need to have that experience of, oh, something's missing, right?
Mhm.
And in B2B type of businesses, that means you need to have some business experience where you were working for somebody and realize, oh, this is a pain in the ass. If only there was a tool that did this, right?
Well,
And I talk to a lot of SaaS companies, and I always ask them, how did you come up with this idea, right? And the ones that say, well, I saw a whole bunch of other SaaS companies doing this. I know there's room in the market. I'm just going to do the same thing. I kind of write those guys off pretty quick, right?
mhm.
But if the answer is, well, I was working in this company and I couldn't find anything that did this, and I kept having this problem, and I talked to my friends and they were all having the same problem. So I wrote this program that would solve this problem. Okay, that's a winner,
Mhm.
right? Or they have the basis of being a winner because they're solving a problem that they experience, that they know a lot of people experienced, and so they're trying to fix something that needed fixing. And
Mhm.
those are the businesses that have the best, probability of succeeding or potential of succeeding, right?
Got it. Fair. So the ones that are original that do something out of necessity, not just copycatting someone to make a buck.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I'm
Fair.
not saying, I mean, there's plenty of businesses out there that started with, I'm just going to make a buck and I'm just going to copy you. And they succeeded and made a lot of money. I'm not saying that doesn't work. It's just the probability of that working is
Much lower.
lower than a business that's solving a problem, right?
Mhm.
Example, Canva. Canva solved the problem, right? They had Photoshop, they had the tools that all of it did, PowerPoint, all that type of stuff, but
Mhm.
nobody put it in a format that made it accessible for others easily,
Mhm.
right? So they were entering a market that technically they had a bunch of competition to, but they actually had a unique offering,
Mhm.
right? which was, and it was a problem because I myself, before Canva came out, had the same problem. It's like, oh my God, I got to use all these different tools. They're all over the place. And I wish it was just in
Okay.
one spot. And I wish my whole team could use it because it's in the cloud. And, and then all of a sudden it's there. Oh, great. I'm going to use that. Right.
Yep.
And so the business succeeded because it had a real need. There was a real need for it, even though it was doing something similar to other businesses. It was similar. It wasn't the same. Right. And they
Yep.
were adding a real value proposition to the business model. Right.
Yep. I could definitely really resonate with that. I think a lot of times when people think of Photoshop, they think of like these really old looking tools where there's like a zillion options on the side, and it just the thought of it, kind of makes your head hurt. But personally, I don't use Canva. Nothing against it. Just there's another platform I use which probably sounds familiar too. It's called CapCut. That sounds familiar.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
CapCut, just from personal preference, because I use it for like editing videos and also just editing kind of thumbnails as well. But same kind of idea. I definitely agree in the sense that before I started using that, and there's definitely a bit of a learning stage to kind of get familiar with all the tools, but the mental lift is much lighter than like having to learn or be perfect at something like Adobe Photoshop or these other really, I don't want to. I know sophisticated is usually a good connotation, but these really like sophisticated tools, and I say that in the sense that they have like a bunch of these features which are great, but no one wants to look at 1,000 different buttons. Everyone just kind of wants to have a simple interface and kind of simple use. So stuff like Canva, stuff like CapCut, that while there's a bit of a learning curve there, the learning curve is much less than it is for kind of those other tools. So I can definitely resonate with that and think that a lot of times people, when they're starting
Well,
businesses,
it's
yep,
only going to get easier, right? Because AI is integrating into all these tools, right?
definitely.
So at some point, it's just really going to be you just kind of state what you need, and it'll just do all the work, right? And that's
Yep.
where it's going, right?
These apps,
Um,
what's interesting about it, I'm not sure about Canva, but CapCut actually has. I'm speaking about them as if like I'm sponsored by them. I'm not. It just happens to be the one
yeah,
the one app that I use. But they have like an AI capability actually, which is really interesting. So it's in the kind of beta stages, but will be really interesting to see where that goes. But it's really cool on that note how you could see, say for example, when you're looking at a YouTube thumbnail, you see like this really cool sophisticated thumbnail, and maybe it took that creator, an hour, 2 hours to make that. But now realistically, with a lot of these tools, it could take you 10, 15 minutes, or with AI, it could take you 5. So really
yeah.
incredible streamline there.
For me, I see AI as a productivity tool,
Hmm.
right? It just allows you to be more productive. For me, like in the marketing company that I have, like I said, it allows us to do things at a much lower cost. You make less money because the physical volume of money is less. On the other hand, you're helping people and you're fitting into a niche you couldn't service before, right?
Hmm.
So and they all, and like I said, they all have advantages and disadvantages. I've played around with AI a lot, and I can tell you there's kind of a sweet spot for it where if you ask it to do certain things, you end up spending too much of your time editing, correcting, going through it, changing it. And if it's too little, then yes, it's not even worth your time, right? So there's sweet spots for all of it. You just got to play with it and learn with it and figure it out. And there's new AI tools coming out every day, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's all kind of, like I said, it's all going in one direction, and the direction is going to be that the work that people are doing that is more monotonous and digital, you're going to have a lot of tools that make it easier and easier and easier, right?
Hmm.
But there's kind of a minimum, and people have to realize AI is not conscious and it's not creative, right? All it can do is reorganize stuff that somebody else did,
Hmm.
right? And it can only generate from stuff that's been done, right? So there's still a market for originality.
Hmm.
And if people focus on originality and use AI as a way of expressing that originality in a productive way, then they're probably going to get benefit out of it,
Definitely, yeah.
right?
I think over time and as kind of AI tools develop, people will definitely be better at finding that balance. But I do think it's a great tool for productivity and will really allow people as a creative flair to shine in the future. So it will be interesting to see where kind of the trend of AI goes in the future and the implications and integrations go. Another thing to kind of jump around into your background on a similar topic to what we were talking about before, as we've mentioned, you're a serial entrepreneur. You've done kind of a bit over 12 different businesses, and I seem to have your handful in a few things, but you've also been fortunate enough to do some business kind of internationally in Europe and in Asia. So is there anything that you'd like to add regarding the business dynamic between doing business domestically as opposed to internationally, and specifically within those two areas?
I think that difference is becoming less and less
Mm-hmm.
because people are now familiar with the way people do business. When I was doing business in Asia, you know, 18, 19 years ago, a lot of it was new for people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how you communicate and the cultural expectations were very different. Even in Europe, I mean, I owned a company in Europe for 8 years and lived there in the 90s. And it was all new territory. And even the marketing was new because it was coming in from a different perspective. But nowadays, running a business there is almost like running a business in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's becoming less of a difference. The biggest difference is always going to be cultural expectations and communication,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you do business in another part of the world, you have to kind of do a little bit of research and understanding of what are the cultural norms, what are the expectations, even from business. You know, what are the expectations? How do you treat people in business? There's little nuances that make a big difference, and you just need to be aware that those exist. If you're going to do business in, you know, Asia for the first time, you definitely want to study on what are some of the cultural
Mm-hmm.
expectations and the way people deal with each other in that area of the world. Even if you're speaking English, there's cultural things that you just don't do or you do that you wouldn't normally do. So you just need to understand that.
Yep. I have a feeling in my head, I thought of not a joke, but in a serious way. If I ever did that kind of research for, say, if I was working with guests internationally or had some business internationally, I'd imagine one of the things that I would do is visit some country in Europe or visit some country in Asia and just sit at like some cafe or sit at some kind of a local restaurant and just kind of observe how people interact and talk, and then really take notes and then adapt that to my business practices.
Well, there's a small part of that that's
Hmm.
there. More on the social side. Um, but what you really need to do is just go find a potential business person that
Hmm.
you would do business with and, you know, go to their office
Hmm.
and just have an honest conversation with them. I'm not familiar with your culture. I'm not familiar with the way you do business. How do you do it? What's the best way to talk? Find someone who has that experience and talk with them before you go, right? So
Hmm.
if you know you're going to go to Taiwan, find a Taiwanese business person in the United States and ask them, what are some of the tips that you have for dealing with Taiwanese people, right, in
Got it.
business,
I like
right?
how you said that, to have an open and honest conversation. I think that it's, a lot of people try to overthink these days, but realistically, people, regardless of their differences, just want to be transparent. And I think if someone's able to communicate that, that kind of breaks down barriers and allows for a much more fluid business process. So definitely great advice on that. Back to kind of your background, one of the things that you initially worked on was the Fatality Gaming brand, which personally I think is really cool. I'm not a huge gamer, but back in the day played a lot of 2K and loved those video sports games. So can you speak a little bit about your time working at Fatality Gaming and kind of the big takeaways that you learned in that role?
Well, for me, that was really an exciting one because we were building a brand. So I got to use a lot of brand marketing, and I had a brand marketing experience from when I had a company, a publishing company in Europe. And that company was oriented around physical sports. So I was also familiar with the concept of sports. So esports fit into what I already had kind of experience with. There's not that much difference between a physical sport and esports. And so I got to use a lot of brand marketing and event marketing. I actually did event marketing in Europe, large cycling events. So going to esports events and doing esports event marketing and show creation all fit into that. Um, but what I really liked about it was about licensing. So not only did we build the brand, but I had to go out and find licensees negotiate the agreements and sign them. And we basically built almost 99 SKUs of products over 18 years, and
Mm-hmm.
probably sold about $300 million in product, and a wide variety. And my background is electronics manufacturing, so I was very familiar with it, and I could work with the licensees on developing product and work with Fatality to make sure the product fit with what he needed and what gamers needed. So it was a great experience. I love doing it, and still have samples of all those products. But and gaming was very good. We were a little before the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was a little bit ahead of the curve in that sense. But there hasn't been really any gaming brand or gamer that had as much of their own product out on the market, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we did something that even today very few gamers have been able to replicate, right?
Got it. Do you have a favorite game that you got a chance to work on there, or are they all kind of your favorite?
I actually like Command and Conquer. That was kind of my favorite. Um, I could play a little bit of Quake,
Mm-hmm.
but first person shooter is not really my specialty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard because I was hanging out with all the world's greatest first person shooter competitive gamers. So when
Mm-hmm.
you get on and start fumbling around with it, you just feel so idiotic that I was like, okay, I'll do something like Command and Conquer. It's a completely different skill set. I don't feel like I'm too embarrassing at that point.
Got it. Okay. No, cool. Definitely, to each their own on that point, but really interesting to hear about your time at Fatality Gaming. Some of the projects that you're currently up to include kind of, working on Rainmaker Web and also being the CEO of Screaming Box. Rainmaker Web, actually a really insightful idea. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like a content creation agency where you work with people to help them create thoughtful, insightful content. So would love to know the kind of inspiration around that and how you're able to do that for people who candidly don't have the time or just plainly don't want to kind of write their own stuff.
Well, it's also not. It's a little bit of that. I mean, I've had Rainmaker for 20 years.
Oh, okay.
We've done a lot of different types of marketing, community marketing, content marketing, distributing content over various communities. I have a partner in Washington, D.C. She has a master's in journalism, and we kind of were looking at where do we want to take it. And one of the things that I kept coming up with is I was meeting a lot of startups, and a lot of these startups, whether they're SaaS or product or anything, usually what their focus is they're just trying to get their initial product or offering up and running. And by
Hmm.
the time they're ready to go to market, they have almost no content. I've met a bunch of them where they didn't even have an about, or their about was basically a paragraph that one of the founders wrote, but doesn't mean a lot. Or bios, it's hard to write your own bio,
Hmm.
and then they need some kind of marketing that gets them some traffic, but they have no budget, right? So if they're going to spend, $500 a month, what are they going to spend it on? And they need content, and probably the most important is they need content that shows how their product or technology can be applied to solve business problems, right?
Hmm.
So they're looking for customers, and the first question customers have, whether it's a product or a SaaS or anything, is, well, how can this solve one of my business problems?
Hmm.
And most startups have a hard time making content that answers that question. Not because they can't, but they're focused on a whole bunch of other things. So we're now kind of in a position where we can offer that, right? And we can do it at a fairly decent price. We can get these startups a flow of content that starts getting them some organic traffic. It helps them, they're usually in a bubble, 3 to 5 people trying to start this startup. They need somebody to kind of talk to figure it out. So if I ask them, all right, tell me about yourself so we can write in about, you know, that can be a 10-minute conversation, but what they really need is they need an hour to sit there and try to figure out, well, what do we want to say about ourselves, and what is our story, and how, we have all these, this is how it kind of happened, but how do we say that in a way that ties in with where we want to go? And they need someone to kind of talk with about that. So that's kind of the other side of the business is, yes, we make content for startups, but we're also literally having kind of a conference with them and brainstorming and experience transfer of, okay, how do we make your story easy to read and easy to understand and easy to, transfer to people who are potential clients or customers? And then how do you communicate what this can do for them, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
most startups are like, well, we got this SaaS and it does A, B, C, D. And that's great. You need to be able to say what the thing does. But most people are not coming to you to say, can you tell me your list of things that your software does? And then I have to figure out, what do those things mean to my business?
Mm-hmm.
What they're really looking for is, I got a business problem. Can you solve it? Right.
Got it.
And so you need to write the content of, how does this thing that you offer solve this problem? And in this industry, how does it solve that problem? And here, how does it solve this? And if this is your situation, how does it solve that problem? So, that's really the content that's really important. And a lot of startups they're busy. They don't have time to produce that or even think about how to write it. Right.
It's a really interesting little niche of an industry going on right now, because I think sometimes I see people who write online, and I'm not going to say any names because I don't want anyone to have any issues with me. But sometimes I see these people with these massive and large followings, and I'm like, this like these seem a little like a little generic. Like I don't know if these people are actually writing everything. So I think a lot of people underratedly use. Not saying that you do that in particular or that you're generic at all, but just generally speaking, that sometimes I see a lot of people, or kind of a lot of folks with these really large followings, and a lot of what they put out online. I don't know. It doesn't. Not that it's generic, might not be the best term, but it doesn't seem as personal or as personable. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, these people might be using ghostwriting agencies. And there's actually one example that I
Well,
saw that I'll mention.
they're probably not using ghostwriting agencies. They're probably using AI, right?
That
So
that's
so
a
that's
good
kind of
point.
the issue, because people, they use, and there's a lot of, you can go on YouTube, you can find a zillion YouTube videos, how to build an agency using AI, and
Mhm,
and you can say, here's all the prompts you need to plug in. And if you use AI to write all of your content,
mhm,
yes, it's going to seem shallow, it's going to seem disconnected. Sometimes it's not going to make any sense. And I can easily tell when I find someone that they're using AI to write all of their content.
mhm,
We use AI. It's the only way we can kind of offer the prices that we do. But the way we've used AI, and I've played with AI at every level, right? We mostly use AI to write outlines, right?
mhm,
I talk to the client, I figure out what it is that they need, what are the issues they're trying to address. I look at it from the potential client side. What is the information I'm trying to get? And then I work with AI to create an outline.
mhm,
An outline then saves us a bunch of time. So if it takes me or my partner 4 hours to write a 1,500 word blog post, right? If I use AI to write an outline, I can cut that down to 2 hours, right?
mhm,
And in those 2 hours, I'm able to write the stuff that has the voice, the context, that actually communicates the real meaning. I don't have to necessarily think about the article's structure. I don't necessarily have to think about little things like titles and headings, because that's put out in the outline, right?
mhm.
Or if I need some research, we need to understand 5 things about this. The AI will get me the research, so I don't have to physically go online to do that. I can read the research, and then I can say, okay, how am I going to put all that research into one paragraph? And
Mhm.
that's easier to do for me than to have the AI do it, where it comes out as some mechanical paragraph. Since I know what the client wants and I know their client voice, I can write that paragraph. But I didn't have to do an hour of research. I was able to do an hour of research in 10 minutes. So
Got
again,
it.
it's a productivity tool. If you use it as a tool like that, it cuts down a lot of the work. But if I just said to AI, write this article about this, and I gave it a prompt, it wouldn't be very good, right?
Mhm. Got it.
It would satisfy the mechanics of SEO, which is the reason a lot of these guys who have followings are using AI, because they're only doing it for that. But if you actually read it and looked at it as communication, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Same with videos. I can
Mhm,
look at a video where a lot of the video is created by AI, and I've used a lot of these video making tools where you take content and it turns it into a video. If you don't put the work into it, it's garbage,
Yep.
right?
I think maybe a good way to look at it, and would love to hear your thoughts on this. AI and a lot of those tools will take you to the 10-yard line, will take you to first and goal, but it's on you to kind of score that touchdown and really bring it home.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say 10-yard line. I'd say like 30-yard line,
30,
right?
30 is also good. 30 is manageable,
Right. You still
depending
got
on
to
the
do some
quarterback,
work.
but
There's
yeah.
some real work there, and if you do it, like I said, AI can help you produce really good content much cheaper than if you just did it on your own. So
Mhm.
it's a productivity value. But if you get lazy and if you try to get it to do all the work, the results are not that good, right?
Got
And you
it.
can see it. I mean, like I said, I can go on a YouTube channel, I can go on a website, I can look at whatever comes up on my screen. I pretty much can see now when it's been generated 100% AI,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
I pretty much, because I played with it a lot. I played with all the AI writing tools. I played with a lot of other tools. Canva is a very good example. I've done it. I looked at it. How do I create 100 YouTube shorts in an hour? Well, the truth of the matter is you can't do it in an hour because all those videos leave out certain little secrets and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
I got it down where I could do 100 YouTube video shorts, faceless videos in my niche in about 3 hours. And they all kind of look good. But, the AI contributed an hour of that, and I had to do 2 hours of it, right, to make it look good. Whereas if I
Mhm.
did the AI 100%, they all came out garbage,
Got
right?
it. I think it's a great workflow you described, because a lot of people are kind of, I don't know if it's as low key as it used to be, but if you can make really viral YouTube shorts, it seems like a way to print cash these days. So hopefully they're successful for you. But I agree in the sense that AI can.
Changing. I mean, we put out about 100,
Mhm.
and it had diminishing return, right? So the
Mhm.
first 50, we got a benefit. It did what it was supposed to do. It got us some subscribers. It positioned our longer videos, more watch rates, and all. It had a benefit. But then after 50, it started declining,
Mhm.
and by the 100th, it almost had no effect, right?
Got it.
Right. So all these things that, they get adjusted, they play out, people figure, okay, this is what they're doing. And then YouTube or whoever says, okay, we're going to adjust our algorithm because people are gaming the system this way or that way. Like I said, nothing stays the same. Right.
Be able to adapt for sure.
Right.
The other cool thing that you're doing right now is you're the CEO of Screaming Box, which you so elegantly have right above you, right there. Can you speak a little bit about your role there and kind of the big thing that your company's able to, the big value that your company's able to add to clients?
Well, I basically handle a lot of kind of the operational stuff. And my main job is relationship, right? So I go out and work with clients and find new clients and help them get their projects started. And my partner in Europe, he works with a lot of the developers. We have developers in Europe and in South America.
Hmm.
Um, and these are people that are all senior level. We've worked with them for years. And, the project side, Screenbox is focused on the SMB side. We don't really do startups.
Hmm.
I mean, we would do a startup if they got funding, but we're not the cheapest agency. We're not the most expensive. We're kind of in the middle. And our specialty is really businesses that they say, I got a problem. Maybe I need to revise my website. Maybe I need a mobile app, maybe something. And then our real kind of added value is we go in and we have a conversation with them and we say, what are your business challenges? Okay, well, yeah, a website redo is part of solving that challenge, but from what you've told me, we can automate these processes and that will help. And oh, you got a customer service thing. Well, we can help integrate customer service this way. Or your customers are having trouble searching. We can build you a search engine that would really help them with what they're looking for. So there's kind of a consultative side on the front end, and then the client will usually say, great, you understand us, you understand what you want, you have some ideas, you guys go build it, right? And
Hmm.
that's usually how the projects start. And for us, we have two sides of the business. One is the project side, the other is team extension. The team extension is more for larger companies who need kind of a developer that they manage and want to take care of. But it's hard to find people, and it's hard to find people that can just come on and work. Again, we have a really interesting developer pool and a way of processing, behavioral analysis, so that when the people go to work on a team extension job, we know they're going to fit and that they're just going to come in and start work. And my enterprise clients love that, so they'll feed it. And again, we're not cheap, right? So they use us when they really need us, and that's perfectly fine. And then the project stuff, again, it really just depends, right? Mobile apps, websites, backends, all that type of stuff we're interested in.
Got it. So some front end kind of consulting stuff, and then some implementation once they know you guys who you say they are.
Yeah. I mean, we've had jobs where somebody's come to me and said, "Here's my SOW, get me an estimate," and we get them an estimate. And they say, "Great, we like your developers and the questions you guys asked, and so here you go." Right?
Got it.
If somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, here's an SOW, we got 7 people bidding on it. You can bid on it too." I'm usually at that point like, I'm not going to waste my time, right?
Got it. So for those that don't know, an SOW is a statement of work. So it's something that consulting firms, or it's something that clients kind of often offer to consulting firms to, show them the kind of work that has to be done. And people often look at it as if it's like a black and white document, when realistically, once the engagement starts going, and Dave, you probably have firsthand experience with this, the SOW starts to take all different kinds of shapes and forms, and clients are
Yeah.
prone to doing that. But I think a lot of the times the best work that's done is the initial example that you brought up, in the sense that, a client will bring you an SOW, they'll be like, "Can you do this?" You'll be like, "Sure." When a client's really trying to book around town, I think at that point they're just looking for, the cheapest cost to do something. Not that it's bad to be cost effective, but you should, if I think someone provides something that you provide something that's of significant value, and it's something that you can probably afford, don't waste too much time shopping around. So I definitely think
Right.
it's
I mean, like I said, our developers are all senior level guys. We pay them well. And the reason we pay them well is we want really high quality work, right? And so if somebody's shopping around 5 or 6 development agencies, there's no way I'm going to be the lowest, right? And I don't want to be the lowest, right? On the other hand, if somebody wants to have a deep conversation about their business challenge, what are the technologies that are available, how would they approach this? That's what we can do. That's what we can help with, right? And a lot of the developers we have a lot of experience in different types of businesses, and so they have a lot of experience in coming up with really interesting solutions, right?
Got it. I think that's an awesome point there, and definitely wish you ongoing success. And I'm sure you guys would be a great choice for people looking for kind of those kind of software services. On another note, Dave, what's your favorite book?
Well, like I said, I'm a science fiction fan, so it's one of my, one of the many science fiction books I've read. I don't know if I have a favorite, um, but I have favorite authors, right?
Mhm.
So David Brin and Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke. Those people are some of my favorite authors.
Got it.
Um,
Awesome. Sounds good. Hope they can come up with more books to keep you entertained. If you
yes.
could give some advice.
Actually, another one is David Gerald.
Mhm.
He wrote a book called When Harley Was One, which was a book written in the late 70s, about AI and about where AI can go.
Interesting.
And David Gerald also wrote for a lot of computer magazines. He's a computer historian. And so that book resonated with me from a very young age. I read it probably 20 years after he wrote it.
Mhm.
But it was really interesting. His take on where AI can go back in that time was pretty accurate. So,
Got it. Interesting. I'll have to check that out. When Harley Was One. If you could give any advice to your younger self, say for example your 10-year-old self or 20-year-old self, what would it be and why?
Well, I'd have to be a man of a lot of regrets to do that. I don't really have a lot of regrets.
I love that.
I've actually lived a pretty interesting and fun life. So, you know,
Enjoy
I
the ride,
guess the
maybe.
huh?
I would say maybe you would tell your younger self to enjoy the ride.
Well, I kind of always have enjoyed the ride. I mean, there were times when I kind of wasted time. There were periods of 6 months or a year where I kind of wasn't really doing anything,
Hmm.
wasn't really learning anything, wasn't really going forward in my life. I guess I would tell myself, just don't do that, right? Use your
Got
time wisely and
it.
try to always grow and don't be too lazy and that type of stuff. But on the other hand, sometimes in your life you just need that to be able to kind of clear your head. So, I don't know if it's advice I would necessarily say, but you know, don't waste too much time is probably the advice I would give.
Awesome. Sounds good. If you could have one actor play you kind of in a movie made about your life, who would it be and why?
Um, well, that's a trick question. I guess Harrison Ford when he was in his 20s
Hmm.
would be perfect.
Got it. Awesome. I love that answer. Maybe he could play some Star Wars character named Dave. So that would
Yeah.
be that would be really interesting. What would you say brings you kind of the most happiness in life?
Oh, my family. So
Got it. It's a beautiful answer. Most people say that or their friends, but I think something I like to ask towards the end because I think ultimately, as people are a little more experienced, they realize that money comes and goes, but the people around you are really what makes stuff fulfilling. So definitely
yeah,
a common but beautiful answer there.
yeah. I mean, for me, yesterday was a perfect day. I love mountain biking, and so me and my family we went mountain biking.
Hmm.
So that to me is like a perfect day, right?
Yep. On my end, I'll get to the last thing I want to ask in a second, but for me, a perfect day is waking up, kind of going to the gym early. After the gym, just making a cold brew and then having a bagel. And like I don't know, a lot of my friends who are probably listening, they'll probably like be chuckling right now or laughing because what I usually make is like an everything bagel with egg, cheese, hash brown, and hot sauce, and like that with like a nice coffee on the side. To me, that's peak happiness. So to each their own, but definitely great to hear that. On a final note, you've done a lot of stuff. You've been a serial entrepreneur. Kind of, you're clearly really really wise. Do you have any final? Is there any final word that you want to share? Whether it's business advice, relationship advice, life advice, software development advice. The final word is yours, Dave.
Well, I guess my advice is stay focused on what's important. Don't get hung up on little things that you can't really control.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to whether it's software or any kind of venture that you're doing, really focus on understanding what the customer wants,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is their need? What is important to them, as well as what's important to the people that you're working with and the people who are part of your business, right? Focus on the people. The product's important, the service is important, but in the end, it's all about people doing things that make a business work well.
Got it. And thank you for the final word, Dave, and thanks so much for taking the time to go on the show.
All righty. Thank you very much, Daniel. It was great being here.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Dave Erickson. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.